Hello, welcome to my history presentation, where I will be talking about the Berlin Blockade. So, the background of the Berlin Blockade. After the end of World War II, the Allied Control Council (ACC) was established at the Potsdam Conference on 1 August 1945. This council consisted of the Grand Alliance members, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, the United States. Also, later on, the French joined in this council. So the purpose of this council was to establish the sole legal sovereign authority for Germany as a whole, removal of all traces of Nazism from Germany, abolition, demilitarization, and denazification of Nazi laws and organization, re-education of the entire population, persecution of Nazi war criminals, and side note, to this end, the Allies trialed 22 Nazi leaders at Nuremberg. The Americans, the British, the French, and the Soviets divided Germany into four regions. So, surrounded by the Soviet zone, the former capital Berlin was placed under the joint authority of the four powers, but was divided into four sections for administrative purposes. An Allied Control Council would have overall joint authority over the country. Here's a map of the divided Germany. It's a bit blurry, but it's fine. As you can see, it's been divided into four sections between Great Britain, France, and United States. And later on, we will see the map of just Berlin as well, which is also divided into four. However, there were differences of opinion among the Allied powers. The Soviet Union, whose population and territory had been greatly damaged by the Germans, demanded large amounts of financial compensation. They seized 60% of the existing industry in their region. They dismantled all the factories and sent them to the USSR. Thus, there was no heavy industry left in the eastern region. They needed German resources to rearm and to rebuild the Soviet Union after the war. 6 million German refugees came from Prussia and Silesia to the eastern part. This caused social and economical problems in the eastern sector. Stalin demanded German workers, but Churchill and Roosevelt did not accept. According to the treaty, the Soviet occupation zone was to supply food products to the rest of Germany. However, when the Soviets could not provide the necessary food, the Western Allies had to feed the German population on their own territory. The Americans and the British were in favor of revitalizing German industry so that the Germans could feed themselves, but the Soviets opposed this step. Cooperation, let me see. Cooperation deteriorated sharply in 1946 when Western powers refused to allow the Soviets to demand further reparations from their own territory. The management of the occupied regions gradually shifted in different directions. Opposing social, political, and economic systems began to emerge. The same goals remained, but their implementation differed greatly as a result. So, the physical destruction resulting from Allied bombing campaigns and ground wars was immense. An estimated one-quarter of the country's housing was destroyed or damaged beyond use, and in many cities the rate exceeded 50%. Germany's economic infrastructure had largely collapsed as factories and transportation systems stopped working. Hyperinflation was weakening the value of the currency, and severe food shortages reduced the diets of many city dwellers to malnutrition. These difficulties were compounded by the presence of millions of homeless German refugees from the former eastern states. So the Marshall Plan. Britain lacked the resources to support Germany's industry. In addition, the Soviet Union took this situation as an opportunity and intensified its communist propaganda. Western powers were increasingly convinced that the key to eliminating the Nazi presence would be through economic aid. Secretary of State George Marshall's Marshall Plan was announced in a speech he gave at Harvard University on June 5, 1947. Accordingly, quoting, European countries should first of all engage in economic cooperation among themselves and complete each other's deficiencies themselves. When a gap arises as a result of this general cooperation, America should help to close this gap. For this, they should first make a cooperation program. This principle was adopted as a result. And this is the divided Berlin. I was talking about this. It's also divided. So, Truman hoped that the Soviets would boycott so that Western Europe would recover. Stalin was surprised by this approach. Wait, give me a second. Yeah, Stalin was surprised by this approach. The US did not leave Europe alone, as they did in World War I. The US, British, and French regions became increasingly cooperative and formed an increasingly unified government. Soviet control in East Germany became more difficult with the divided Berlin. This was not what Stalin had hoped for, and Germany became increasingly disunited. After this, we got the Berlin Blockade. In February 1948, the Allied powers decided to combine the different occupation zones in Germany into a single economic unit. In protest, the Soviet representative withdrew from the Allied Control Council. The last joint conference of the ACC was held in London in March 1948. The British, French, and Americans proposed the unification of the Western zones, the establishment of a West German government, and the creation of a new currency. This currency would also be valid in West Berlin. Viewing this as a violation of their post-war agreements, the Soviets immediately issued their own currency, the Ostmark, into Berlin and Eastern Germany. That same day, June 24, 1948, they blocked all road, railway, and canal access to the Allied occupied zones of Berlin, announcing that the four-way administration of the city had come to an end. With the blockade, the Soviets cut off access to electricity as well as water, food, coal, and other essential supplies for approximately 2.5 million civilians in the three western districts of Berlin. Although the Red Army vastly outnumbered the Allied military forces in and around Berlin, under written agreements with the Soviet Union in 1945, the United States and Britain joined three 20-mile wide military forces from West Germany to West Berlin, and therefore they had control of the air corridor. Truman was given the idea of sending troops to West Berlin but however, he did not accept this and turned this event into an Anglo-Saxon popular victory against the inhuman practices of the Soviets. Beginning on June 26, 1948, 2 days after the blockade was announced, US and Britain aircraft carried out the largest air relief operation in history, carrying approximately 2.3 million tons of supplies to West Berlin in more than 270,000 flights over 11 months. It was called Operation Witness. And here is a little video that I got, which is pretty nice actually. There's this man who just gave like chocolate to the children in Berlin so that they could enjoy something as well, since they didn't have any food, nothing like at all, and he wanted to give them a like a treat as well, since they're children and they it's their right to grow with sweets and stuff. So yeah, here's the video.
At the end of World War II, the Soviets were holding Berlin under siege. In order to save millions of people from starvation, the US and Allies devised a plan to airlift in food. One American pilot decided to take it a step further. He delivered candy.
My name is Gail Halverson, but I'm known as the Berlin Candy Bomber. I didn't think that the airlift would last very long, so I thought I'd better get a movie of this operation before they send me home.
One day, while filming the planes taking off and landing, Gail became aware that there was some young children watching him. He went over to talk to them, and after a while, he realized,
"Dummy, don't you know kids like chocolate?" And I knew that they had not had chocolate in the stores in Berlin for 2 years. And I reached in my pocket, and all I had was 2 sticks of Wrigley's Double Mint gum. And I broke the 2 sticks in half, gave it to the kids, and the kids with half a stick tore off the wrapper into thin strips and passed it to those without gum. And those who received the wrappers put it up their nose and smelled a piece of wrapper.
inspired by their generosity, he decided that next flight he would drop them chocolate and candy via parachute from the plane.
They said, "How do we know what airplane you're in?" And so I said, "When I come over the airfield, I'll wiggle the wings of that big airplane." And they said, "Oh, great."
True to his word, the next day Gail began to drop the packages. What started with just 2 sticks of gum eventually turned into 23 tons of chocolate.
From then on, I was known in the press and all the kids in Berlin, "That's Uncle Wiggly Wings."
And in case you were wondering if the candy bomber still has a sweet tooth.
Oh yeah, I still eat chocolate. I like dark chocolate.
And yeah, there you go. So the kids in Germany basically didn't have like any food at all, and him, I think, giving them even the gum, and after like giving them all those chocolates, like made me want to add this video. I think it's really nice. And well, the Soviets, like what they did is really inhuman, as I said before. So this really like brings joy, and like it proves that this operation really helped Germany, with not just ideological intentions, but to actually help them.
At the end,
Yes, so continuing with the rest, it was clear that the airlift could continue indefinitely. Stalin lifted the blockade on land access to West Berlin on 12 May 1949. The airlift continued until 30 September. The Berlin blockade and the Allied response in the form of the Berlin airlift represented the first major conflict of the Cold War. Although Stalin had hoped that the Berlin blockade would force the Allies to abandon their efforts to establish excuse me, a West Berlin state, the success of the Berlin airlift confirmed that these hopes were in vain. By the time the Soviets lifted the blockade in May 1949, the crisis in Berlin had hardened the East-West divide in Germany and all of Europe and intensified the Cold War. Thanks for listening to my presentation. That was all.